today's guest is Mr. Curt Robbins, who is a technical writer and a speaker for the field of cannabis. He has been a consultant in this industry for the past 15 years, has written over 600 articles for a variety of different cannabis magazines, including Cannabis Culture, Cannabis Aficionado, as well as Strainprint. So welcome to the show, Curt.
Thank you. It's nice to be here, Tia. It's always fun to try to educate listeners because there's so many misperceptions and misunderstandings about the herb that we call cannabis.
Yes, and it seems like you're very experienced with it. You've been working with it, as we mentioned, over 15 years. I'm sure you've seen the industry evolve quite a bit in the past 15 years. Tell us what you've observed.
Oh, well, it's kind of, we have been lusting for legalization as a culture and as a potential industry since it went illegal in the United States, at least in 1937. It happened several years prior to that in Canada in the 1920s. Canada, of course, just last year, about a year ago, I believe it was October 18th, went federally legal, which is a major change for the global cannabis industry. We have 11 states that are adult use legal now, and for listeners who are not familiar, there's really two forms of legalization. There's medical programs where you must be a patient and you must qualify for a state or province's qualifications, to use the same word twice. They say there's a list of ailments that you have to have. If you don't have Crohn's disease or epilepsy or MS or cancer or intractable pain, we're not going to grant you a medical card and let you walk into those medical dispensaries. And we have more than 30 states in the U.S. now that have medical programs in place. Just to be honest, not negative, some of those programs do not serve patients very well. They often have very restrictive lists of conditions. Texas is one of the states. Ohio is reasonably limited. They could do a lot better. Some of these states don't even include PTSD, which is extremely common and quite a disservice to the military veterans who served the United States. And, they come back home after combat, after seeing some really horrific scenes. They're told that, no, you don't get medical cannabis, even under our medical only program. So we've got a lot of stuff to work on. In those 11 states that are legal, the regulatory oversight and the precise manner in which that jurisdiction regulates and manages cannabis and cannabis businesses and taxation and distribution and all those elements, food safety. If we're talking about infused edibles, these are really important topics. Well, among those 11 states, regulatory oversight varies considerably, to the point that some of the biggest thought leaders in finance and industry in the world have called the current cannabis industry, especially in the United States, a pocketed mess, because the rules in Nevada are different than the rules in neighboring California, by far, are different than other legal states like Colorado or Seattle or Washington, and now we've got some East Coast popping up, which is very excited. So we've got Maine and Massachusetts. There's a lot of thought leaders in Boston right now. You've got Dr. Peter Grinspoon from Harvard there. There's Dr. Ben Kaplan. These are doctors who are enlightened and educated on the efficacy of cannabinoids and terpenes, these wellness molecules that we find within cannabis and hemp. And they're kind of leading the charge on the East Coast. So it's nice now. The legal cannabis industry used to be very West Coast leaning, centric, right? Mm-hmm. And even though it was all started by Colorado and Washington State back in 2012, those were the originals that started adult use legalization. And I think that in itself is kind of amazing. We're, coming into 2020 now, but it was only a few short years ago, 7-8 years ago, that we just started getting legalization. And despite, any sensationalistic headlines you see at the newsstand, we still, for real legalization, for adult use, anybody can use, purchase, make, and consume this herb. We still only have 11 states that do that. And sometimes they do that in a way that's not necessarily logical or to the best benefit of patients or the economy.
Interesting. Well, it looks like it's definitely evolving. Now, I'm curious, when you decided to get involved with cannabis, why cannabis? What attracted you to this industry?
Um, I had consumed it as a teenager. Uh, I used to, when I was writing for a lot of the cannabis magazines, one of my most common questions of people I interviewed, didn't matter who they were, was at what age did you start consuming cannabis? I always just found it kind of entertaining. And the most common is about mine, about 13, 14 years old is the most common answer I've ever received. For the curious listeners, the youngest was 9, and the
Wow.
oldest was probably my ex-wife at 32. So it's all over the place, right?
Right.
Yeah, she smoked. I can't believe she went to college and then she didn't smoke weed until she did so after she was married to me. So life's interesting in that respect.
You expanded her horizons.
Well, let's hope, but you never know.
So, it sounds like you're also a parent. What are your thoughts about consuming that young when, I mean, obviously kids have access to it. What are your thoughts? And do you think we can have any laws that protect children from usage?
Um, well, it is true that, before the brain has finished forming and other organs and systems of the body, I think that is kind of a special stage in human development. At the same time, as a culture, especially certain factions and subcultures in America we're fearful of the euphoria associated with THC, and we do a lot of chanting, "What about the kids? What about the kids?"
Right.
I have children in college, and I care about them dearly, and this is an important concern. The people I've interviewed who consumed cannabis, sometimes on a fairly heavy basis and regular basis, beginning at 10 or 11 years old, sometimes they're attorneys and CPAs and architects and responsible adults who continue to consume to this day. So I just anecdotally, this is not based on scientific research. I really want to stress that to listeners. But anecdotally, I have not personally seen any problem with someone who starts consuming cannabis even at an exceptionally early age and does so on almost a daily basis for a long time. And I think this is one of the cultural and economic challenges that we have as a society adopting hemp and cannabis at the legal level, and a lot of people getting involved. And hey, when the way you feed your children depends on this industry, these are very important issues. There are incomes and livelihoods behind all of this. So that's really why I try to stress the science part of it, right? But anyway, anecdotally, I just haven't seen it really damage anyone. And scientifically, what I've learned after those, 600 articles and a couple books and a white paper and just, a bunch of research and writing about cannabis, is that there's a wealth of medicinal efficacy in these molecules we call terpenes and cannabinoids. Terpenes come from more than 20,000 plants in nature. They're what give it the aroma. But cannabinoids, as their name suggests, come only from cannabis, okay? And all this research shows that they have sometimes startling medicinal efficacy. I'm not going to use the word, I'll try to stay away from hyperbole and words like amazing. I'm not going to say miracle. It's not a damn miracle. And people who say that need to check their language, right? We're setting expectations for lay people and the people who are not experienced with this herb. We need to be very careful. But we have literally, and this is one of the biggest fallacies, especially in politics and just the popular culture, but you hear there's not enough research. Tia, when's the last time you heard that? Yesterday? Not enough research.
Right. All the time, of course.
Yeah, right. Well, it turns out there are thousands of studies, and some of these deeper dive projects I've gotten involved in, like a white paper I recently did about CBG. It's about 50 pages, right? It's like a short book. I did that for Hemptown USA in Canada. And I've learned through projects like that is that there are thousands of studies. It's not dozens, it's not hundreds, it's thousands. We're probably over 10,000 at this point. The doctor from Boston I mentioned earlier, Dr. Ben Kaplan, he is assembling a database on his website, and he has some amazing resources that he's put together. You wouldn't have to even go beyond his database, and he's only got part of it, to show that this is just thousands upon thousands of peer-reviewed serious scientific multi-million-dollar research studies. And they show such a medicinal efficacy that now I understand why the person who's been consuming cannabis on a daily basis since they were 9 years old, I understand why it didn't warp their brain or kill their brain cells or cause any degradation to their body, that in fact, it probably made them healthier and prevented the onset of several diseases or negative conditions for a variety of reasons.
Oh, you can't tell us there's a variety of reasons and not tell us some of those reasons. Why do you think that is?
Okay, so in the beginning, we thought that cannabinoids, and again, cannabinoids are these molecules that only come from the cannabis plant, and THC is the most common. It's the most abundant cannabinoid produced by the plant, at least in modern cultivars. Cultivar is the modern way of saying strain. And we tend to talk about strains of cannabis like Durban Poison and Girl Scout cookies and, things like that. Strain is technically, scientifically more appropriate for like a flu virus. So cultivar is really the way to go. And anyway, THC is the most common. CBD is the second most common, but for the past several decades, hundreds of years in actuality, farmers and cultivators who breed cannabis and have pumped up the THC and had no real regard for the CBD. So some cultivars of cannabis have upwards of 30% or more THC percentage, and the CBD is virtually non-existent. So we've done that through breeding. That's not necessarily how this plant genome evolved in society.
Mm-hmm. Do you think excuse me, go ahead.
But I didn't answer your question. So at first we thought the cannabinoids were the only molecules in the plant that delivered medicinal efficacy. And we thought that the terpenes, all they did, again, terpenes are found in more than 20,000 other plants in nature. We thought all they did was create aroma. Mm-hmm. And evolutionarily that wards off pests and predators in nature, and it attracts pollinators. So that's the function there. But we didn't think there was any medicinal efficacy in terpenes. And then we learned, holy cow, through research, scientific research studies, holy cow, the terpenes provide as much and often mirror efficacy to the cannabinoids. And so to answer your question, the efficacies are fairly wide-ranging. They're sometimes anti-cancer. We see reductions in tumor size. And again, these are documented in dozens and hundreds of research studies. We see reduced inflammation. Now, this is really significant because a lot of diseases are based in inflammation. Even cancer at the cellular level is in kind of inflammatory immune system response and such. It gets really complicated, but there is a role of inflammation in diseases like cancer. When you say inflammation plays a big role in arthritis, people understand that, right? Even lay people say, my joints, whatever, they're swollen, they hurt. And any molecules that we can put in our body that reduce that inflammation are helpful to our health and our wellness. There are other things that are a little more specific, like reduction. And this doesn't happen with all cultivars, by the way, but because different cultivars contain different cannabinoids and terpenes, and therefore their efficacy, their effectiveness is different, sometimes markedly so. I don't know if you're a cannabis consumer, but those of us who are, we've all had a cultivar that just got us revved up, right? Got us energized, got us very awake. It was like we had a pot of coffee. And there are others that will put you to sleep in short order. That's because they have different mixes of cannabinoids and terpenes. So the terpenes, again, have just as much and often very similar efficacies: anti-cancer, anti-inflammatory, reductions in ocular pressure. Hey, that's good for glaucoma patients. That's not just a joke, in a Seth Rogen movie or something. The reduction in ocular pressure can prevent somebody with glaucoma from going blind. I don't know about you, but I don't want to go blind, right? I need my vision for a whole lot of stuff. Sure. So that's an amazing, almost life, certainly life-altering, almost life-saving efficacy right there. And I could sit here and talk about the efficacy of different cannabinoids and terpenes for the next 4 hours because it's a really long list.
Absolutely. Now, is there any molecular similarities between cannabinoids and terpenes?
Well, and we could really deep dive on this, and I do encourage people to check out my CBG white paper. We wanted to deep dive on CBG, but if you don't understand the endocannabinoid system and cannabinoids and terpenes and receptor types, CB1 and CB2 and all those issues, it's hard to do a deep dive on a particular cannabinoid. And listeners can find that at hemptownusa.com/CBG. They did a great job. They made it really easy, right?
Perfect.
And so there's something known as a biosynthetic pathway. Now, this is a way scientists and researchers describe the evolutionary or kind of from larval stage to butterfly to, the metamorphosis or morphing, if you will, of molecules through a lifespan. And so it turns out that guess where cannabinoids come from?
Terpenes.
You got it. The kind of the mother source, if you will, the molecular kind of evolution of these little molecules, the source is terpenes. And there are different types of terpenes. Again, this is chemistry, it's biochemistry, it's how those molecules get into the human body or a dog's body or cat's body. They have an ECS too. And how does it interact? What does it cause? Because to be quite honest, efficacy is not only very, very subjective. We take the exact same sample of cannabis. It could put you to sleep and rev me up. That's the reality of the way it works.
Right.
And that is confounding for wellness professionals, medical doctors, consumers, be they medical or adult use, because holy crap, we like to be able to predict these things, right?
Right.
You and I drink milk and we're probably going to have a relatively same response. But wait, you might be lactose intolerant, So subjective efficacy is a really important thing. It's bad enough that we go around using blanket terms like cannabis is good or cannabis is bad, which are completely technically ridiculous statements. They just don't even resound with logic or, they're ridiculous. So, this is, if anything, for a listener who has to drop off like right now, I just want to say this is deep science, but it doesn't take a PhD to understand the basics of it. And, you just need to understand that we have the terpenes, we have the cannabinoids. It's nice to know that the aroma comes from the terpenes, because if you like a particular aroma, you should seek out cultivars of cannabis that contain certain terpenes, which you can do in legal markets because we test and we identify what's called the terpene profile or the cannabinoid profile. We do a lab analysis, and there's a document from a certified third-party lab called a certificate of analysis, a COA, and that, again, different jurisdictions have different requirements. So there's good COAs and I've seen crap COAs. It's like, you didn't tell me anything, guys. All they were doing is satisfying the regulatory oversight with their COA. But some of these test lab results go into great detail and have pie charts, and they're just beautiful, and they're very educational if you understand what they're talking about, right? If you speak their language. And they'll show you the mix of terpenes, and they'll show you the list of cannabinoids, and you might find that, that terpenoline terpene, I just don't like that. Every time I have a strain that's rich in that, it just messes me up somehow. I don't like it. So you can purposefully not consume or seek out strains, cultivars containing certain terpenes and cannabinoids. And that's where I think the knowledge of the efficacy of individual cannabinoids and terpenes, and again, start with the major ones. THC is the obvious beginner. That's the most common. So let's learn about that. And then CBD. Personally, I know I just developed a white paper on it, so that's why I'm all hot on it. But CBG, cannabigerol, I'm more impressed by it than I am CBD. I think CBD, especially CBD isolates, are somewhat of a fad. I would not base my entire business model on a single molecule like CBD.
So obviously there are many cannabinoid analogs in the plants. Tell us about some of the more important ones. Obviously CBG is one. So let's do a deep dive and understand a little bit more about that molecule.
Analogs, cannabinoid analogs is a great topic because, we think, there's THC, there's CBD. Well, it turns out we have identified roughly 113 different cannabinoids at this time. Wow. we talk a lot about THC and CBD, but there's 113. But here's where it gets a little more complicated and where listeners get some true insight. There's CBD is actually a family of molecules, of 7 different molecules. What? What are you talking about? Nobody's talking about this stuff, right? CBG, cannabigerol, is a family of 7 molecules. They're all very similar to each other. Sometimes they have an identical molecular structure, but like a different chemical there's ways in which they're extremely similar, but then there's one structural element that's slightly different. And that gives it a different binding affinity with these receptors in the endocannabinoid system of humans, dogs, and cats, and horses, etc., all the mammals. And that binding affinity, that way that that molecule locks into that microscopic cellular receptor, is important because those cellular receptors, sometimes called CB1, CB2, GPR17, 55, they're neurotransmitters. So they're sending signals throughout the body. That's like when you have an immune response problem like Crohn's disease or something, where the body is basically attacking itself. Gosh, why would the body attack itself? That doesn't make sense. I understand cancer coming into my body or a flu virus and, attacking my body. That I get. But gosh, why would the body attack itself? Well, things get messed up sometimes and it results in inflammation, all these other things. It turns out if we supplement the ECS with cannabinoids and terpenes, that we get a balance in it. And that balance is called homeostasis. It's the way the researchers and scientists basically how they label wellness, right? Gosh, my friend Bob, he just looks healthy, right? He's a healthy dude. What the heck does that mean? In my world, and in the science of cannabinoids and terpenes and the endocannabinoid system, I would say that means that the ECS is balanced and has achieved, it's in the neighborhood of homeostasis.
So is there such thing as an endocannabinoid deficiency? And is that why people may actually feel ill and then take cannabis to feel better?
Well, according to Dr. Ethan Russo, a scientist and researcher here in the United States, yes, ECS deficiency is a very real thing. And in fact, he has published research going back many, many years. I encourage listeners to, it's called Google for a reason. Just tap in Dr. Ethan Russo, Russo, and you'll come up with a wealth of research studies, information. I've cited, I've dropped his name and cited his research in literally dozens of my articles. He's just a really pioneering researcher. Anyway, he not only said a deficiency in the ECS probably leads to disease and bad health conditions, but he identified very specific conditions like fibromyalgia, arthritis, Crohn's disease, multiple sclerosis, and several others. And again, he took it a level deeper because it is a research study after all, right? It's not an episode of Bob's Burgers. He's trying to educate other scientists so we can improve, the health of humans. He showed how also, a deficiency in the ECS in a certain way can result in systemic inflammation. That systemic inflammation can manifest itself as, say, arthritis or bursitis or Crohn's disease or any one of literally hundreds of diseases based in inflammation.
So there is published data that suggests the cannabinoids can reduce systemic inflammation. Is that correct?
Yes, there is.
And
yes, absolutely.
Which cannabinoid is most responsible for reducing inflammation, or cannabinoid plus terpene? Which ones are the most, key potential culprits?
Actually, many of them, I'm tempted to say most, but I would like to have, a pie chart in front of me and see some real percentages or a table or something with some tallies before I say that. So let's just say most cannabinoids and terpenes, or I'll say most cannabinoids and many terpenes reduce inflammation, especially, and localized inflammation is different than systemic inflammation. Again, this is deep science. So we have to be very careful about how we toss these terms around.
So if you have systemic inflammation versus localized inflammation, would your choice of cannabinoids be different?
Well, I think my choice of consumption avenue would be different. Let's say I went and I investigated and I found that, wow, THC and CBG and CBDA, and we'll get back to analogs here in a second because that was your original question, that they're all good for reducing systemic inflammation. So I'm going to seek out cannabis products that have those. For localized inflammation, like say, arthritis in your elbow or your knuckles, one of the very best ways to treat that is with a topical. And that's an infused cannabis product where they use some technology to extract cannabinoids and terpenes from the product, and they put it into a cream or a balm or a lotion or a spray. We got sublingual strips. That sublingual absorption is another form of consumption. There's ingestion, which gets metabolized to the stomach and the liver. And guess what? Molecules like THC, and I know this gets complicated, but when you inhale them via either smoke or vapor, they take a certain path. They go in through the lungs. You got the surface area of a tennis court in there. Kind of a neat fact. Then and they absorb. Don't hold your breath with cannabis. You're just oxygen depriving your brain and looking like you're 1982. The absorption in the lungs of cannabinoids and terpenes happens in 2 to 3 milliseconds, thousandths of a second. So there's no reason to hold at all. It's just kind of in. And here's what I recommend. Cap it with some air. The last third of your inhale should be air because that guarantees that all the valuable cannabinoids and terpenes get pushed down past the esophagus into the actual lungs where they can be absorbed, handed over to the heart. Heart pumps them to the brain. They have to go across the delicate blood-brain barrier, and that's a very selective area of the body because we got to protect the brain, or we're going to die when we're 2 years old. So it's very, very selective. It won't even allow endorphins to pass it. But it takes particular cannabinoids and terpenes and says, welcome to the party, and shuffles them across the blood-brain barrier into the CB1 receptors. And that's when they start to have efficacy. And again, from a euphoric or psychoactive perspective, if we got a bunch of THC, we say, oh, I'm starting to feel that. Now, inhalation, whether it's vape or smoke, takes about 2.5 minutes. If you eat it, and this is really important, if you eat it, ingestion gets metabolized by the liver. This is onset. And onset is a subset of bioavailability. Bioavailability has onset, duration, peak, characteristics like that. Onset, we know for inhalation, 2.5 minutes, lickety split. You eat it, it's going to take 45 minutes to 2 hours for onset. And here's the biggest mistake people make. They hear 45 minutes or 30 minutes, or they assume 10 minutes or whatever, urban legend they subscribe to, whatever misinformation they receive. And then, wow, it's been 1.5 hours and I'm not feeling anything. I better have 2 more brownies. And they do that. And then it starts to kick in and they go over the top high, right? They're spun out, as my kids would say. They've just had too much. And that's why understanding these consumption avenues and their onsets as a subset of bioavailability is super, super important. Most of us have at some point in our lives consumed alcohol in some form. If you didn't understand how a certain volume of alcohol affected you and the onset and duration, et cetera, you would not really be qualified to consume that substance, especially if you're out in public and have to drive a motor vehicle.
Right.
So these are really, important elements. So yeah, let's go back to the analogs. So let's take CBG, my new favorite cannabinoid molecule. Not all, but many cannabinoids have something called a varin version. And it's one of those 7 analogs. Now, not all cannabinoids have 7 analogs. It's a varying number. It's typically in that zone. And so there's a molecule called CBG, and that's labeled the neutral version of the molecule, to use proper language, okay? Then there's the varin version, which, as you can guess, is CBGV. Now, let's look at THC, which is such a, popular, infamously popular cannabinoid. There is THC, and let's talk beyond varins for a second. Let's talk to acidic precursors. Acidic precursors, when we talk about that biosynthetic pathway, the acidic precursors they are the larval stage where it's the caterpillar that becomes the butterfly. So the butterfly is THC, and the caterpillar is THCA. And this is true for all cannabinoids. CBD, it's true for almost all cannabinoids. I do want to correct that. They're not all created by acidic precursors, but most of them, especially the major ones, are. So CBGA is like the mother of acidic precursors because it creates the other acidic precursors like THCA and CBDA. And then CBDA and THCA create CBD and THC. And so we start to understand this biosynthetic pathway. And it goes even further. THC, when it's exposed to UV light, okay, even just physical jostling, like during shipping, it's on a truck or being put on a shelf, heat and oxygen can all begin to convert THC to a cannabinoid called CBN. N as in Nancy. And CBN is quite a bit different than THC, even though, again, molecularly it's pretty similar. The CBN tends to be sedative. It's bedtime for bonzo if you get enough of it. Now, it's typically in low quantities in cannabis, but there's a very interesting study that was done. We'll put this in the show notes. And they tracked the degradation of THC into CBN through the biosynthetic pathway with exposure to different temperatures and stuff. They got quite, scientific about this. And they tracked it for like 6 years. It was a great study. Mm-hmm. And they showed that it lost roughly 17% of its THC per year to CBN. So the THC keeps reducing and the CBN keeps going up. And yeah, if you took cannabis and, put it in a drawer and forgot about it and found it 4 years later, it might be relatively sedative, put you to sleep. Why? Because the THC had converted to CBN probably just through oxygen. Most people don't use, a lot of people don't use oxygen-proof storage.
Right. Okay. Now, you mentioned something about THCA, which would be available in the raw forms of cannabis. Is that active in the body? Does that provide any benefits at all?
Absolutely. We found that there is medicinal benefit that rivals the neutral version of the cannabinoid, like THC. THCA has just as good medicinal efficacy. It's just in slightly different areas. Sometimes they share efficacies, like they might both reduce inflammation, right? But then this one stimulates appetite and this one kills appetite. Well, that's a good example. THC is infamous for doing what? Stimulating appetite, giving people the munchies, right? You want to eat your parents' Doritos, and then you get grounded. Yeah. So, well, it turns out THCV, the Varin analog to THC, it does the polar opposite. This is why these slight molecular variances between THCA, THC, and THCV, between those variants, is so important. We cannot trivialize these because THC is going to stimulate appetite, but THCV it actually kills appetite. I've had cultivars of cannabis, like landrace strains from South Africa. I had one called Voodoo once from Canada. And I think I had about quarter ounce, eighth ounce. And anyway, so I loved it and I blammed through it pretty fast. It absolutely killed my appetite. I would do like 2 days of fasting. Now that's totally different than THC.
What strain is that, and can we get a massive quantity of it?
I know. Well, I personally, I'm not an investment guy. I'm a technical writer. But if I were advising clients on how to invest their money in the cannabis industry and such, quite honestly, I'd say, CBD. I'm not trying to put down CBD. It's a valuable cannabinoid, but I would target my personal dollars toward THCV. And there's a few others like CBG and CBGA. I would really I would put all my money there, quite honestly. THCV has immense, and there are other molecules that kill appetite too. We need to, and terpenes. We need to keep that in mind. But think diabetes, think obesity. Gosh, is there an obesity epidemic in the United States? Have you gone to Fridays or Chili's on a Friday night lately?
Right.
Obesity problem. It's not healthy. Sometimes just being a little overweight, and a lot of us are, but it's just not the healthiest thing in the world. If you see some of the numbers on, an extra pound of fat, how many additional feet of capillary that results in, and how much more strain that puts on your heart. We wonder why people are, dropping over at 55 because of heart conditions and such. That's another thing that these cannabinoids and terpenes can help with. Back to your efficacy question a little earlier in the interview, I think one of the most powerful efficacies of all these cannabinoids and terpenes who hit this mark is a reduction in anxiety. Because, and this is somewhat controversial, but I believe that anxiety, especially at really peak level, sustained over a long period of time, that it results in disease. If you have a lack of anxiety and you're happy and content, you sleep well, you eat well, you exercise, you're going to be a lot less likely to contract a disease or a negative wellness condition. So the mere we see this even in like the Cheech and Chong and the Seth Rogen movies where someone smokes a joint. Many of us who have actually done it know. And there is a certain feeling of relief, a certain cathartic, well, that's really a reduction in stress and anxiety. And if that can prevent the onset of disease or conditions, now it's kind of an invisible benefit, right? Prevention is not something a lot of doctors talk about. Mm-hmm. We tend as a culture to typically prevent or to forget rather preventive measures. But that's how, when I look back to the first time I consumed cannabis when I was 14 years old, and the decades since, I have been blessed by very good health for the most part. Mm-hmm. And I attribute that to basically three things. One is my consumption of cannabinoids and terpenes from the cannabis plant. The other one is exercise. And the other one is I don't drink 7 Cokes a day. I have very little sugar intake. Mm-hmm. And, I enjoy life and I eat rich foods, but I go out and exercise too. So that's kind of one thing I want to leave listeners with is cannabis is not a panacea. Just because you smoke a couple joints a day or take a CBD tincture or something like that, that is not necessarily going to result in improved health or preventing you from getting cancer. You need to, I can't emphasize how much you need to exercise. Right. And just in a nutshell, the reason you need to exercise, we want to tie this into the endocannabinoid system and this whole topic we're discussing, is because the endocannabinoid system in all mammals, in fact, it's in all vertebrates. Get that. Mm-hmm. All vertebrates. There are some sources that will say all mammals. I've written many articles where I said all mammals, which is technically true, but actually it's not the whole picture. It's all vertebrates. So it's quite amazing. Now, I do want to say that some of those more primitive creatures, they have a much more primitive ECS, but still there's some sort of binding affinity with a certain set of cannabinoids. And all cannabinoid systems, I don't care if it's a dog, a cat, a human being, a horse, they produce endocannabinoid systems versus phytocannabinoids. Phyto means plant, and so the cannabis plant produces THC, CBD, CBG, all these terpenes. Those are all phytomolecules. If it's an endomolecule, that's pretty straightforward. That's produced by your body. And the cannabis plant is producing molecules, cannabinoids like THC and CBD, in a mimetic fashion because it turns out they actually mimic cannabinoids that we produce within our own body. The plant isn't getting into the party by using someone else's name on the guest list, quite honestly, and the endocannabinoid system welcomes those phytocannabinoids so openly and lets them do very rare things like cross the blood-brain barrier, as we said earlier. I mean, there's a hormone, endorphin, right? Runner's high. Mm-hmm. Okay, when you get runner's high, do you think that's from endorphins? Most people do.
It's an anandamide.
It is. It's an anandamide. It's an endocannabinoid. We create it ourselves. Okay, in the endocannabinoid system, BAT and 2-AG are the two major ones. But the interesting part is we also create endorphin, this hormone, right? Mm-hmm. I believe it's created by the pituitary, produced by the pituitary gland. Anyway, so we got endorphin. The blood-brain barrier allows molecules like THC from an outside, potentially dangerous source like cannabis, right? Mm-hmm. Into those receptors, won't even allow our own homeboy endorphin into the same receptors. So there you go, food for thought.
Why do you think that is?
I think endorphin is a hormone that's intended to be a painkiller. So
Right.
it's just, it doesn't necessarily have maximum efficacy going into the CB1 receptors, especially if there's another molecule more qualified, and we call that anandamide. So, we have to, again, see the big picture.
Interesting. Now, do all vertebrates have anandamide and 2-AG as well? Or
I'm not aware of that, but I would say I don't think a starfish, some of the more primitive vertebrates are doing that. And if we really want to take this into a science, we have to find out, do dogs and cats produce anandamide? That is, when we get in these really kind of niche topics and niche markets, say CBD for pets or whatever, that is an area where I do believe we need more research. Okay.
Right.
But just kind of straight up research about THC and CBD and the endocannabinoid system of humans and how all that works, we have thousands of studies on that. So the next time you hear any thought leader or any politician or regulator say, we need more research, that is complete crap. We got a lot. Interesting.
Is there any evidence of, monkeys or other animals in the wild consuming cannabis?
I haven't done much research or writing on that. It's an excellent topic. I love it. I'll add it to my spreadsheet. I've got about 230 topics on it that I would love to write about, but have not yet.
Interesting.
So, yeah. So I'll add it. But, that's a great question. If we got a monkey at the zoo that's causing a lot of trouble because it's acting out and it's beating up the other monkeys, and it's, peeing on the guests and stuff like that. Gosh, if we gave it a little cannabinoids and terpenes to balance out its endocannabinoid system, would the monkey be work and play well with others? Possibly. It has an endocannabinoid system, and if we can balance a human endocannabinoid system, we can do so for monkeys and horses too.
It's interesting. I definitely have.
Yeah.
I've heard of some anecdotal evidence where they've given race horses hemp oil, and it's treated a lot of their ailments.
Nice.
So I definitely
sure, they get arthritis. Yeah, if they're racehorses, they're going to have training related injuries necessarily. So that's great.
Yeah, so it's great. There's a lot more to be discovered within the plant.
There is, absolutely, and so I'm sending a message of we have a ton of research already. But yeah, when we start getting into topics like, what's the best way to treat an English bulldog that's got, anxiety and severe arthritis. Yes, the phytocannabinoids from a plant like cannabis can be, in some use case scenarios, of significant medical benefit. And this is also new to consumers that most people are mind blown who I talk to just to learn that there's an ECS in creatures other than humans. And you and I know that that's just the beginning of this dialogue.
What is the status of using cannabis, whether it's CBD or THC, in the pet market? Do we have any definitive answers on whether or not it's effective for them?
So we've got a few things there. There's CBD and hemp. Now, what we need to do for listeners is define the difference between hemp and cannabis, because most people are a little confused by this, understandably so. Back in 1971, a Canadian scientist by the name of Ernest Small wrote a book. And in that book, he was talking about hemp and cannabis, and he needed to define the difference between hemp and cannabis. Now, a lot of people, this is controversial. A lot of people disagree with this. Current activists, they don't like the approach. But anyway, the short of it is, regardless of the reasoning, this scientist in his book said in 1971, okay, let's say for sake of argument that hemp is a certain level of THC. So we got 113 cannabinoids, 200 terpenes in the cannabis genome, and he selected one. Now, it is the most common, and it's the one that economically and in other aspects it's kind of all based on, right? There's a lot of focus on that single molecule. And he said, okay, if we get it below 0.3%, if it's that or lower, we're going to call it hemp. Now, this is a big, big deal. If it's that or over, it's cannabis. This is a big deal because we only have 11 adult use states in which you can, cultivate, process, sell, distribute, transport, et cetera, cannabis products, right? And they aren't even allowed to do interstate commerce with each other because the feds call it Schedule 1 and, have prohibited that. So in California, yeah, they got 40 million people, but California can't trade with Nevada to the east or Oregon to the north, even though it's legal in all those states. This is how, ridiculous all of this has gotten. But all those states use very, very different regulatory oversight. I think what I'd like listeners to leave with, we could go a lot of directions with this, is we all love our pets, in the Western world. We love our dogs and our cats. I don't know if there's a way to treat goldfish. I don't know if they have a primitive ECS, quite honestly. But our pets are typically family members, and we want them to be in as much comfort as possible. It's very important to us. And I do believe the cannabinoids and terpenes can be of assistance. Now, one of the problems here is that multiple studies have revealed that medical schools in the United States, about 10% of them are teaching about the ECS and cannabinoids. And even of those, sometimes they spend 20 minutes or they say, hey, go read this on your own. It'll be on the test.
Right.
They don't really focus on it. And this is bad, right? And I'm not trying to kick the AMA in the teeth or, say doctors are bad because they don't know about cannabinoids, because they're in a system that doesn't encourage that, especially in prohibitionist states, right?
Correct.
Some of these, it's a big deal. But so if we've got 10% of the doctors, well, this is true for veterinarians too. So yeah, you take your cat or your dog or your lizard or whatever to the vet, and what can we do, doc? Well, we've tried all the conventional medications, and there's not a whole lot we can do here. We're sorry. Your response might be, I've read that cannabinoids and terpenes might help because my dogs have an endocannabinoid system. And hey, doc, can we talk about that a little? That's a very difficult and often strained conversation, because the doctors are either anti-cannabis or they're just completely ignorant.
Right. Now, is there any research that suggests that these compounds are effective, or is there a need for research to be done?
There is definitely a need for more research on animals, but there is some research out there. Again, I encourage people to go out and explore. Sometimes it takes 30 seconds to do a Google search and to come up with some very compelling and insightful and enlightening, data. So it's all out there. Great starting point. Dr. Peter Grinspoon, Dr. Ben Kaplan. These are serious scientists. They do not worship this plant. They treat it as serious medicine. And more importantly, they treat it as one tool in their toolbox. It is not the only tool, because that is a ridiculous way of approaching health and wellness.
That makes sense. Now, did we cover everything that we needed to cover as far as CBG? I know you were very excited about it. I wanted to see, for the listener, for example, when would I want to consume CBG? And isn't it really hard to get your hands on it?
Well, here's what I would do. And this is really easy. I know it sounds a little techy, but because I'll recommend a free service, Google Docs and Google Sheets. And, we got these free Google cloud-based documents where you can share them with others just with their email address and comment and resolve issues and all this cool stuff. Okay. I would recommend, especially patients, they create a basic table and just list your ailments. Maybe you don't have any ailments and you're just trying to prevent ailments. Or maybe you got, multiple stuff stacked up, right? A lot of us do. Anyway, list your ailments. Then list all of the popular cannabinoids. I would list THC, CBD, CBG, CBN, CBC, and there are others, right, that we just really don't have the time to go into right now. I would list the major cannabinoids, and again, I encourage people to Google this. Leafly's got a list of major cannabinoids. I've covered major cannabinoids. There's a lot of sources for this. List half a dozen or 10 of the terpenes, and then do just a little research based on your particular conditions and put a little X beside the cannabinoids or the terpenes that are supposedly deliver efficacy for your condition, right? You got glaucoma, and certain cannabinoids and terpenes are supposed to reduce ocular pressure, improve your vision, and reduce pain. Then you should definitely seek those. Now, the next trick, and you want another column in your little table that says what cultivars, or the more common word is strain, even though it's technically less appropriate, but what common cultivars of cannabis, especially where you live and what you can legally buy or perhaps find on the underground market contain those particular molecules. And that's not always an easy task, quite honestly. I mean, this is one reason that I sometimes hesitate to do product reviews, because the product I'm reviewing is likely available in only one state. There's a lot of really cool cannabis companies and services here in Nevada, and especially Las Vegas, but nobody outside the state can consume them. So why would I want to tell, an international audience about it?
Right. Makes sense. Okay. Very cool. Last question I had. Obviously, there is a lot of anecdotal evidence with THC in cancer. Have you seen any major data, or are you aware of any major research information that's happening within the area of oncology?
Yes. In fact, another name I would like to introduce listeners to is Mara Gordon. Mara Gordon is with Zelda Therapeutics, and the Aunt Zelda's brand is actually one of her relatives there, the backstory on that. She's in Bodega Bay, California. She's doing some very impressive research and work. She's truly a thought leader and, very progressive in the cannabis industry. She also knows how to monetize, because if we can't pay the bills, everybody says we need more research. Did you know that the average, peer-reviewed, double-blind clinical research study is like $2 to $3 million?
Right. Yeah.
It's expensive. There's a lot of controls in place. People have PhDs. They have $10 million, machines to analyze molecules and stuff. It's not a small pursuit. But anyway, Mara Gordon has been a part of multiple research studies. And in 2018, one was released. I forget the name of it, but it's centered on breast cancer. You could just literally type, 2018 research study Mara Gordon, and it would probably pop up at the top of the Google list. And it showed how a variety of molecules, I'm not sure if they limited it to cannabinoids or not, but showed how they were effective in the treatment of breast cancer. Now, we have to be very careful. When we say effective, I didn't say cured cancer. Right. And I hesitate to even mockingly use that phrase, right, to put those two words beside each other. The smart approach to treating any disease is to use every tool in your arsenal, right? Well, cannabinoids and terpenes and supplementation of the ECS might be one of those tools, but chances are it isn't all of the tools. So logically, we can never necessarily say cannabis cured my cancer or cannabis put my Crohn's into remission, because in the end, it's probably a lot of factors, and cannabis and cannabinoids and terpenes was just one of them. Right.
Fabulous. Well, thank you for a wealth of information and a great overview of the endocannabinoid system. We'll go ahead and put all of those recommendations in the show notes as well. So if anyone wants to do any more research, they have access to that. Any final thoughts or final words before we leave?
I think I'm blessed. I think the industry is blessed by a lot of really impressive thought leaders and researchers and scientists. And again, I tend to focus on the researchers and the scientists, not the celebrities. We need them all to make this economy and this culture work. But I would encourage readers to, if you want to look up, we talk about these fancy numbers, 600 articles and such. I developed the majority of those articles under a pen name called Gooey Rubinski. And I did that because at the time, years ago, starting in 2004, I was working for corporate America. I was paying my mortgage, and my car lease with straight up technical writing for corporate America, banks and insurance companies, not organizations that embrace cannabis. So I wrote under that Gooey Rubinski, SKI, pen name, and there's hundreds of articles out there under that pen name. Some of them are getting a little older. They're starting to drop off, because I sold those to clients. So, they do whatever they want with them. They're not my intellectual property. For the past year and a half or so, I've been writing under my real name, Curt Robbins. And so any new content coming out from me is going to be under Curt Robbins. The white paper for Hemptown USA is one of them. And for those who prefer instructor-led seminars, whether it's distance learning or in person, I have had a lot of requests for that type of thing. So I am going to start rolling out a series of seminars and classes.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again for your time. And I look forward to having an evolving conversation in the future and maybe talking about how the industry has evolved even further.
That would be fun, Tia. Thanks.
Thank you so
I appreciate
much.
it.
Thank you. Have a great day.